Chosen one, stop for a moment, because the reason you were drawn to this message may be connected to something you have not seen yet. Somewhere in the story of the person who may one day become your spouse, there may be a moment they cannot explain. A dream, a vision, a powerful impression, a face they could not identify, a presence they could not name, and somehow the person they saw felt real. They may not know your name, they may not know where you live, they may not even know that you exist yet, but something about that vision stayed with them. And that is where this story becomes different, because what if the person you are meant to meet has already experienced a moment that made them wonder whether someone was missing from their life? Not because they were simply lonely, not because they were looking for anyone, but because they saw something that felt strangely specific, a person standing in a particular place, a face carrying a feeling they could not forget, a voice, a smile, a peaceful presence, or perhaps simply the unmistakable feeling that they had encountered someone important without actually meeting them. And after that moment, something changed. They started paying attention. They started noticing people differently. They started wondering why certain encounters felt significant, why certain places felt familiar, why certain dreams kept returning, why they suddenly felt that their future relationship would not be ordinary. And perhaps the most confusing part was this: they could not explain who they were searching for. They only knew that someone was missing from the picture. And chosen one, if this message resonates with you, do not rush to assume that every dream or coincidence proves something supernatural. Instead, consider the deeper possibility. Sometimes the human heart recognizes a desire before the mind knows how to describe it. Sometimes a dream brings emotions to the surface that a person has been carrying quietly for years. And sometimes faith gives people language for a hope they could not previously explain. That may be why this title matters, because the real mystery is not simply that your future spouse saw you. The real mystery is what they felt when they saw you. Did they feel peace, recognition, longing, protection, a strange sense of familiarity, or the feeling that they had just been shown a person who would eventually become important? Imagine waking from a dream and remembering one detail more clearly than everything else. The face. You do not know the person, you have never spoken to them, yet for some reason you cannot forget them. You go through your day normally, you work, you talk to people, you continue your responsibilities, but somewhere in the back of your mind, that image remains. And then something even stranger happens. You begin to notice that you are no longer satisfied with connections that feel empty. You begin to desire something deeper, something peaceful, something genuine, something that does not require you to become someone else just to be loved. And perhaps that is the first part of the journey. Not finding a person, but becoming ready to recognize the right kind of person. Because if your future spouse truly has a vision connected to you, the vision would not simply be about your appearance. It would represent something, a feeling, a season, a purpose, a relationship that carries meaning. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting, because the person they saw may have represented the kind of love they had been asking for without knowing exactly what that love would look like. They may have seen you surrounded by peace while their own life felt uncertain. They may have seen you walking away from something while they were still trapped in an old chapter. They may have seen you smiling in a way that made them feel safe. Or they may have seen nothing dramatic at all, just you, and somehow that was enough. If you have ever felt that your future relationship would arrive differently from what you expected, tell me what that feeling has been like for you. You can describe it in your own words. Because sometimes the strongest changes begin quietly, and there is something you need to understand before we go deeper. A vision does not necessarily mean that your future spouse literally knows your identity today. It may mean that something awakened inside them, A realization, a longing, a new standard for love, a desire to stop repeating old patterns, and if that happened, then the vision may have been less about giving them your name, and more about preparing them to recognize what matters when the right person eventually appears. But why would they become so desperate to find you? That question leads us into the part of this story most people overlook. Because the search may not have started with you. It may have started with what they realized about themselves after seeing you. And once that realization began, they could no longer return to the way they used to think about love. There was now a picture in their mind of something different, something deeper, something they had not been able to describe before. And the closer they get to understanding it, the more the pieces of your story may begin moving toward the same point. But there is another part of this you may not have considered. The vision may have appeared during a season when they were not looking for you at all, and that is exactly why it affected them so deeply. There are moments in life when something arrives before we are ready to understand it. A conversation, a dream, a sudden realization, a person who appears for only a few minutes but somehow changes the way we think. For your future spouse, the vision may have been one of those moments. They may have been focused on completely different things. Their career, their responsibilities, their family, their own healing. Perhaps they had already experienced disappointment. Perhaps they had stopped believing that a meaningful relationship was possible. Maybe they had become comfortable being alone. And then, unexpectedly, they experienced something that reopened a question they had buried. What if the person I am, meant to build a life with, is still somewhere out there? That question can be powerful because it changes the way someone sees ordinary encounters. Before the vision, they might have looked at relationships through fear. After the vision, they may begin looking through possibility. They may become more careful about who they allow close to them. They may stop chasing people who create confusion. They may become less interested in temporary attention, and they may begin asking whether the next person who enters their life carries the qualities they felt in that mysterious experience. That is why their search may not look like desperation from the outside. They might not be running through the streets looking for someone. They might simply be changing. Their standards change, their priorities change, their emotional boundaries change, their patience changes, and somewhere inside them is the feeling that there is a person they have not met yet. Perhaps they even question themselves. Was that just a dream? Why do I remember this so clearly? Why did that person feel familiar? Why did I feel safe? Why did I wake up feeling like I had lost someone I never actually met? Those questions can stay with a person, and this is where the title's deeper meaning begins to emerge. Your future spouse may not be desperately searching for your physical location. They may be searching for the meaning of the person they saw. They may be searching for the feeling, the peace, the connection, the kind of relationship represented by that vision. And when they meet someone who carries even one part of that impression, they may pay attention. This is important because real love is not always recognized through dramatic signs. Sometimes it is recognized through consistency, through peace, through emotional safety, through the strange feeling that you can finally stop performing, through a person who does not demand that you abandon yourself to earn their affection. That may be what the vision prepared them to recognize. And perhaps you have been going through your own preparation without realizing it. Maybe certain relationships ended. Maybe people you thought would stay suddenly disappeared. Maybe you spent seasons wondering why your love life seemed delayed. Maybe you watched others find companionship while you were left asking why your story was taking so long. But delay does not automatically mean denial. Sometimes time reveals what haste would have hidden. A relationship that arrives too early can become a lesson. A relationship that arrives after growth can become a partnership. And perhaps the person who will eventually meet you needed their own lessons first. They needed to understand what love is not. They needed to stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. Attention with commitment, possession with protection, intensity with intimacy. And perhaps you needed your lessons too. You needed to learn that being wanted is not the same as being valued. You needed to learn that being pursued is not the same as being respected. You needed to learn that loneliness should never convince you to accept something that destroys your peace. That is why the journey may have taken longer than you expected. Not because your story has been forgotten, but because both people may have been becoming different versions of themselves. Think about that. Two people, living separate lives, experiencing completely different circumstances, learning different lessons, and yet slowly becoming more capable of recognizing each other. If you have ever wondered why certain relationships had to end before you could move forward, you can share that experience in the comments. Not because every ending has a hidden supernatural meaning, but because sometimes reflection helps us recognize how much we have actually changed. And now we reach another question. If your future spouse has already experienced something that made them think about someone, and what actually feels like home, but there is still one piece missing. The vision showed them something. It changed something. It created a desire. But why would they feel that urgent pull now? Why would the need to find that person become stronger instead of fading? The answer may have less to do with obsession and more to do with timing. Because when a person finally becomes ready for something they once thought was impossible, the desire for it can suddenly become impossible to ignore. And that brings us to the shift. Part 3. When the search becomes real. There is a moment when an idea stops being an idea. It becomes a decision. Your future spouse may have spent months or even years wondering about the person from that vision. But eventually wondering may turn into action. They begin changing where they go, who they speak to, what they pray about, what they are willing to accept, what they are no longer willing to tolerate. And perhaps, without realizing it, they begin moving closer to the kind of environment where your paths could eventually cross. This does not mean every coincidence is a divine instruction. It means that once the heart becomes clear about what it values, behavior often follows. Imagine someone who previously avoided serious relationships. Now they are willing to have an honest conversation. Someone who constantly chased emotionally unavailable people. Now they walk away from inconsistency. Someone who was afraid of commitment. Now they begin thinking about building a stable future. Someone who believed love always ended in disappointment. Now they allow themselves to hope again. That is a major shift. And if the vision was meaningful to them, it may have become a reference point. Not necessarily a literal photograph of your future, but a picture of what their heart was being prepared to recognize. This is why you may need to hear something important. Do not become obsessed with trying to identify your future spouse. Do not turn every stranger into the one. Do not force a connection simply because someone resembles an image you imagined. The purpose of this message is not to make you chase. It is to make you understand. If something genuine is meant to develop, it will not require you to destroy your peace to make it happen. You will not need to manipulate. You will not need to beg. You will not need to convince someone to see your worth. The right relationship should reveal itself through mutual effort. And perhaps that is what your future spouse is learning too. Maybe their search has taught them patience. Maybe it has taught them discernment. Maybe it has taught them that the person they saw cannot be found through desperation. They must become the kind of person capable of building something healthy when they finally meet them. And perhaps that is why the vision did not give them every detail. If they had known your name, your location, your entire future, perhaps they would have tried to control the process. Instead, they were given enough to create hope, but not enough to remove the journey. That distinction matters, because love is not a treasure map where every step is marked. It is two people making choices, two people growing, two people recognizing each other's character, two people deciding to build, and when the moment finally arrives, the vision may suddenly make sense. Maybe they will hear you say something that sounds strangely familiar. Maybe they will notice a quality in you that matches what they felt. Maybe your presence will create the same peace. And perhaps they will wonder, why does this person feel familiar? Not because they have literally met you before, but because something about you resembles the emotional truth of what they once experienced. That is the moment the old mystery can begin connecting with reality. And there may be another reason they are becoming more determined. They may have started realizing that the person they saw represented something they had been missing. Not perfection, not fantasy, connection, peace, a sense of partnership. Someone who could walk beside them rather than constantly pull them into chaos. And if you have been learning similar lessons, then you may be preparing for the same kind of relationship from the opposite direction. You may have become less interested in temporary attention. You may have stopped entertaining people who only appear when they need something. You may have learned to protect your emotional energy. You may have discovered that solitude can be healthier than the wrong relationship. That is not a punishment. It can be preparation. And perhaps one day when you meet this person, you will understand why the previous chapters could not continue forever. Not because every painful event was planned, not because every disappointment had a secret purpose, but because you grew through experiences that taught you what you needed to know. There is something else worth noticing. When two people are genuinely becoming ready for a healthy relationship, their lives often begin changing in practical ways. Their routines shift, their circles change, their goals become clearer, their confidence grows, they become more honest about what they want, and those practical changes can create the circumstances in which two previously separate lives finally intersect. That may be the real meaning behind the feeling that someone is searching. They may not know exactly who they are looking for, but they are no longer willing to settle for what they know is wrong, and that can bring them surprisingly close to what is right. If you have reached a point where you would rather wait for something genuine than force something temporary, you can write that in the comments in your own words. Let it be a reflection of your standard, not a demand for a specific person. Because the final piece of this story is not about chasing your future spouse. It is about recognizing what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And when that moment comes, the vision may finally stop being a mystery. It may become a memory of the beginning. Part 4, when the vision finally makes sense. Now imagine the moment, not a dramatic movie scene, not thunder in the sky, not some impossible event, just an ordinary day. You meet, you talk, you laugh, you discover small things about each other, and somewhere, during that conversation, your future spouse realizes something. There is a familiarity they cannot explain. Maybe it is your expression, maybe it is your voice, maybe it is the way you respond to something. Maybe it is simply the peace they feel around you, and suddenly that old vision comes back, the image they thought they had forgotten. The feeling they could never explain, the person they saw without knowing the name, and for the first time, they may wonder whether the mystery has finally arrived in real life. But the greatest revelation is not that they saw you. It is that the vision may have prepared them to recognize something they otherwise would have overlooked. Think about how many people pass through our lives. How many conversations happen, how many faces we see, how many opportunities appear and disappear. If someone is not emotionally prepared, they can meet an incredible person and still fail to recognize the value of the connection. Preparation changes that. It makes you pay attention. It makes you slow down. It makes you ask better questions. It makes you notice character instead of appearance alone. And perhaps that is what happened inside your future spouse. The vision created a question. The question created reflection, reflection created change, change created preparation, and preparation may eventually create recognition. That is a much deeper story than simply saying your future spouse is looking for you. Because the real journey is about becoming capable of recognizing each other when the opportunity arrives. And maybe that is what has been happening in your life too. Maybe you have wondered why you had to become stronger, why you had to learn boundaries, why you had to become comfortable with yourself, why you had to stop chasing people who could not meet you emotionally, why you had to walk away from relationships that looked good from the outside but left you empty inside. Perhaps those experiences taught you something valuable. They taught you what peace feels like. They taught you what respect looks like. They taught you that love should not require constant anxiety. And when the right connection arrives, those lessons may become your protection. You will not be impressed simply because someone wants you. You will look at how they treat you, how they communicate, how they handle conflict, whether their actions match their words, whether they respect your boundaries, whether you can grow together. That is the kind of recognition that matters. So if your future spouse has indeed had a vision that felt connected to you, perhaps the message is not, go find them. Perhaps the message is, become ready to recognize what is healthy when it arrives. Because desperation is not the goal, peace is chasing is not the goal, mutual movement is fantasy is not the goal. Reality is, and if two people are meant to build something meaningful, both of them will have choices to make. They will have conversations. They will have misunderstandings. They will have ordinary days. They will have difficult moments, and they will need to choose each other through those realities. That is what turns a mysterious vision into a real relationship. So perhaps the person you will eventually marry is not sitting somewhere with a perfect picture of your entire future. Perhaps they simply experienced a moment that awakened hope, a moment that made them realize there was more possible for them. And maybe that hope has been quietly guiding their choices ever since. At the same time, your own journey has been shaping you. You have been learning, healing,